Welcome to Introducing a Research Study on the Neuro Strength-Based Approach to Autism. My name is Stacy Neustadt, and I am a speech-language pathologist and certified autism specialist. I'm also the therapy director at BEIN Enterprises, a clinic in Mesa, Arizona.
Hi, my name is Susan Golubach, and I'm a now retired occupational therapist who used to work with Stacy at BEIN Enterprises. I've also been diagnosed on the autism spectrum. And we are here to talk about an approach that, as an OT and autistic, I feel very strongly about. Okay, let's present the objectives of what we hope to accomplish with this presentation. We're going to be talking about why we strongly feel there needs to be a change. What led to the development of this, what I have termed a neurostrength-based approach to autism, how we can use research to help us recognize what autistic behaviors are telling us, which I think is vital to understanding them. What data are we gathering from the individual, parents, and therapists to help develop goals that are functional and motivating for the autistic individual? How we plan to research the effectiveness of this approach, why the involvement of parents is so important to this approach, the challenges encountered in making a paradigm shift. In addition, the initial feedback from the therapist and autistic individuals who have taken the first steps toward this approach. And that's the most exciting part of what we're going to present. So why a neuro-strength-based approach to autism? We have heard in the past 10 years, there's been a big movement toward a strength-based approach to autism rather than continuously working on their deficits, which is not real motivating for the autistic individual. And myself, I know as an autistic individual and listening at workshops on all the things that's wrong with us, it hit me all wrong. But the strength-based approach that is being promoted right now, it does use strengths as a strategy to motivate. It promotes building on existing strengths to help them learn new skills. What I've added to it is an understanding of the neurological differences that research has uncovered about how the autistic brain functions, which from my professional and personal perspective, I have used to help explain the differences in how the autistic person responds and learns, basically by looking at their behaviors, because even we don't understand ourselves well enough to be able to articulate it. But using research, I think we can identify what their behaviors are trying to tell us. That then allows us to adapt the environment, a task, or even our approach to better accommodate the needs that they are expressing via their behaviors. So what's behind my push to develop this neurostrength-based approach? I had started working on it years ago, but this really pushed me into wanting to formalize it. It's an article by an OT on authentic strength-based practice. Can neurotypical professionals make a paradigm shift? I had not really thought, since it was easy for me to understand what I was talking about, it didn't occur to me that it would be difficult for non-autistic therapists, professionals to understand. One of the quotes that she made in this article talked about me. Autistic individuals are expressing anger and frustration at therapeutic interventions that diminish their interest, i.e., ignore their strengths, and are continuously focusing on what they can't do. Advocacy groups are also making a distinction between interventions that provide supports and services to help the individual achieve personally valued goals versus normalizing their behavior so they can mask and pass. And yeah, this is me. I worked with the autistic population for years, and I feel very strongly. She also mentioned in her article article about how autistic self-advocates should be leading the way. And this is where I feel like very strongly that it is the autistics that need to be able to educate professionals to better understand and accommodate us. So what led me to actually developing it in the first place? Personally, I recognize my differences from the time I was born. I made it my obsession to try to figure out why people did and said the things that they did, because it didn't make sense to me. I would have to practice facial expressions in the mirror, and I would have to do all kinds of things to try to figure out people seem to expect me to be like them, and I wasn't. I had to learn how to pass to be like them. I was finally diagnosed on the spectrum in my early 50s, and I spent the next 20 years working with focusing really on autistic individuals in my practice, interacting with the autistic community at workshops and conferences, giving presentations from both my personal and professional perspectives. Professionally, I became an OT well before I knew that I was on the spectrum because it met my needs. I specialized in school-based practice so that I could understand normal development, figure out what it is I didn't get while I was growing up. I focused on sensory processing, executive functioning, auditory processing, all of which were areas that I struggled with. I finally went back and got a master's degree in special education, assistive technology, because I recognized that assistive technology made my life easier, and it's going to make it easier for those clients that I work with. I continued even till today to obsess on the neurological underlying reasons for our differences. And this is what I'm going to be focusing on, and the neuro-strength-based approach is going to focus on. So what is the neuro-strength-based approach, and what is it not? Well, it's not another intervention strategy or another program. There are plenty of programs out there. It is, though, an approach that any parent, educator, or therapist can incorporate into whatever program they are using that can enhance the progress and motivation of their autistic clients to achieve self-directed goals. It's also a way of looking at and understanding autism. It's not that black box that everyone claims we can't understand. I think it is understandable. And once we understand it, we can develop goals that will target function, enable us to function in the way that our brain allows us to, not fix our deficits. It will enable the therapist to select strategies to be able to accomplish those goals that will use and build on their strengths and make appropriate accommodations to both the environment and the task to meet their particular neurological needs. So, number one goal of this new approach is to bring parents, family, and the individual into the goal writing process. I've sat in many an IEP meeting in which the parents were invited to tell us about their child, what their strengths are, what goals they have for them. But when the IEP, the goals were finally written, none of that information was ever incorporated into those goals. I think it's vital that we listen to parents. We want them to identify the functional goals that they see the autistic individual needs and wants in their home and community as our focus, not their deficits. We need the parents to identify the strengths that will motivate the individual to work toward goals that the individual sees as self-beneficial. We need the parents and family and the individual to identify the potential strengths. And these are strengths that aren't yet strong, but they are strongly desired. And so they have the potential to build on in order to help them accomplish. We can expand on it or build on it to help them develop the skills and knowledge that they are seeking to be able to function. It will also, we want the parents to identify current limitations that will need accommodations. In other words, we all have limits, and we all need to recognize there's certain things we can't do, and there's things we do very well. What are the limitations that if we ignore them and instead expect that they can do them, we're going to get all those tons of negative behaviors. So we need to be able to accommodate in order to avoid adding to their stress and triggering these stress responses. Currently, autistic behaviors are considered limitations, period. And they get in the way of developing skills and knowledge. So the current thinking is, let's teach them more appropriate behaviors. Let's extinguish these negative, odd, strange behaviors. What has happened, and I picked up this slide on the internet under autistic behaviors, and look at the wording. They describe us as inappropriate, aloof, unresponsive, odd behaviors. And this is my favorite. Using echolalia, repeating words or phrases in place of normal, as if we choose to do that, as opposed to need to do it in order to try to function. We need to change our approach from judging autistic behaviors to accommodating them. So why write goals that build on autistic strengths? Because strengths, as you know, there's a foundation to every house. It is what makes a house strong, without which it's going to tumble. Strengths are that foundation for learning. These are actions that an individual can do and will purposefully repeat. Knowledge that they understand and use are strengths. We need to latch on to those. Potential strengths are basically actions and knowledge the individual's interested in, seeks to do, wants to learn, tries to do. In other words, they're motivated, but they haven't yet acquired. That's what we're going to build on, because you can take the desired function you want, and if you link it to a strength they already understand, not only are you going to get that function, but you're going to enhance their motivation to want to continue to learn. If you're linking it to a deficit, you're not likely to get that function, and you're not definitely going to get motivation. So let's look at deficits. Deficits, in my definition, are actions and knowledge that the individual hasn't yet learned, or has learned but doesn't understand, or performs only if prompted or rewarded. Those are useless skills that they've learned. They are not the foundation on which you can build or expand. Each one has to be taught separately, and you never know. And it's not likely that they'll ever be generalized, because if you do rote learning, you're going to get rote performance, and only when you push the button. So let's take a look at strengths. I'm sure there's a few of you out there that question whether autistics even have strengths. The strengths we do have are the result of our differences, not despite our differences. I only know one individual that has that Rain Man quality, where they can do something very well, very quickly, and it's genius. Most autistics have these characteristics. They attend well to details, they perceive patterns despite the differences, they have good retention of facts, logical thinking rather than emotional responses, respect for rules and intense focus. All of these are strengths that you're going to find in most autistic individuals. So let's look at, how do you build on those? Look at the child who lines up cars. Drives us crazy, right? Oh, well, they line them up, put them away. There's no purpose to it. That's not true. This individual is making sense out of chaos by organizing. And that's the whole purpose, is to see that there's order, because he lives in a world that seems chaotic. Build on that interest in organization and making sense out of chaos to help him develop a career in any field that builds on organization and order. Think about the individual that likes to arrange things with a little bit of difference, but basically the same. They see the patterns despite the differences. Build on that strength. This individual could become someday an architect or perhaps an artist, because again, they use colors. They have a sameness to them, but they do a lot of variations within that sameness. Same thing with jewelry making. Those are all directions that say, build on those strengths. What about the individual that blocks out the world? Leave me alone. Let me focus on my whatever interests me. That's the kind of individual that makes a great IT person or a librarian. Anyone that can hyper focus and see details that most people are going to miss. So another strength that I will be emphasizing with this approach is intrinsic motivation, because motivation that comes from within is much more powerful than motivation that comes from without. Basically, motivation is essential if we're going to encourage individuals to work outside their comfort zone. When you have a disability, you have to work very hard, much harder than individuals to which these skills come easily and naturally. So we have to have a strong motivation to want to work outside our comfort zone. I got to where I am today because I decided if I want to get what I want in life, I'm going to have to face my fears and work outside my comfort zone. It also will help avoid learned dependence, which a lot of, unfortunately, our autistic individuals have learned because of the approach that we're currently using. Intrinsic motivation, to define it, basically is what drives us to act in our own best interest, whereas extrinsic motivation reflects our social needs, what we respond to as a social person, and our individual personality traits, what we see in ourselves as important. A study at Princeton University supports the findings that other researchers have suggested that intrinsic motivators do work quickly, which is why they are used, but only in the short run. They don't last in the long run. You take away the motivator and you take away the performance because they're no longer motivated to do it if that motivation is not there. So why focus on function instead of remediating specific skills, you may ask? Because skills may or may not lead to function. You could teach a child math calculations, but does that mean that they understand how to balance a checkbook or any other math, daily math skills that we do every day? Follow a recipe or convert one recipe to another. Once they learn to tie shoes, that takes a long time. That's a very complex skill. Does that mean they're going to all of a sudden be able to do that for every aspect of getting dressed? That's one isolated skill. The same thing with learning to read and write. Those are complex individual skills that if they don't acquire or they're hard to do, are not necessarily going to generate or generalize into function. So let's look at function is actually self-reinforcing and meaningful. Okay, I'm going to learn math calculations by making change. I'm going to learn to put on slip-on shoes as part of getting dressed. I'm going to make function is the focus, not that they can do each individual thing. I'm going to make it as easy. Elastic pull-ups, easy to pull over shirts. Make it easy so that they achieve function quickly. Reading and writing. Why does it have to be the way traditional individuals learn to read, to communicate via written material? You can have a computer read to you. You can dictate to the computer and it will translate it into written words. That's function. Focus on the function, not necessarily the individual skills that ultimately you hope will lead to function. Okay, so we still continue to look at behaviors as differences instead of looking at them as potential strengths. So why? Because look at some of these behaviors that they use to determine this is an autistic individual. Meltdowns, hand flapping, teeth grinding, playing alone. These are behaviors, even I agree, are not typical behaviors. So it is hard to understand. These are strengths and these are differences that we should, how do you accommodate lack of eye contact? The reason we focus on behaviors as differences that need to be extinguished is because that's what we see. This is what we see, and it's logical that that's what we conclude. What I'm attempting to do is look at the meaning behind the challenging behaviors to help you understand what these behaviors mean in terms of what the individual is communicating that they need. So there is a good reason why we should, though, look at behaviors, because behavior is communication. The behaviors will tell us what the individual needs. For example, if you see a decrease in performance, that's indicating there's an underlying need that's not being met. If you accommodate that need, you're going to see an increase in performance. The opposite is also true. Whenever you see a consistency in the way they perform something, even though it may seem odd to you, not typical, it is a strength that you can build on. It's something they know how to do. You can strengthen it by expanding on it to develop new skills and knowledge. And in the course of doing so, you're going to be increasing their motivation to continue to learn, because they're going to feel good about themselves that you're recognizing something they can do instead of focusing on things they can't do. And their ability to do things is they're going to gain new skills and knowledge. It's easier to remember something if you link it to something you already are familiar with. So the goals of the NeuroStrength approach continued. We identified parents as being number one. Number two, my goal is to use research to recognize and interpret autistic communication by their behaviors and identify the underlying neurological issues based on research that they are dealing with, that we need to accommodate. My third goal is to strengthen, via these accommodations, their ability to cope with the challenges they face that others may perceive as behaviors that should be extinguished. My fourth goal is to choose neurostrength-based strategies and assistive tools that will appeal to their strengths and help them achieve goals that they can attribute to themselves as success coming from their own efforts and abilities, instead of crediting other people. Well, I only did it because you showed me how, you taught me how, so I'm going to do it your way to please you, but I know it didn't come from me. So let's look. I keep talking about research as helping us to identify what the needs are and what their behaviors are telling us. So what does research tell us? First of all, I have grouped the research that I have done into the autistic brain into 4 categories. One is alerting to and sustaining attention. And in this area, they have found a lot of inconsistencies and imbalances. I have always thrown in we do the extremes extremely well. All right, they've also found research, some anatomical differences, but also continuing with inconsistencies and imbalances in which the way the autistic brain makes connections within the brain to process the input. They have also found differences in how autistic individuals perceive and use input from their bodies to initiate, coordinate, and adapt the responses they make. If you don't feel your body doing things, it's really hard to direct it, which is why I had to practice in the mirror what a smile felt like, because I didn't know how to respond when my dad said, smile for the camera. Even though I physically had the ability to, I didn't have the sensory awareness to know how to do it. They've also found limitations in the types of memories that the autistic individual stores and can retrieve. And that interferes with our ability to carry out a task. If I can't retrieve that information, I don't know how to get started on a task. I don't know. I get lost. If I'm interrupted in the middle of a task, I have to start all over again. And it's a memory problem. So this is the kind of information that I have built into the training videos for those therapists and the parents viewing them to help them understand these neurological differences in the behaviors that they see in their child. I start with a frame of reference that describes how everyone learns. We take in information, we process it, we make a response, and based on that response, we decide, based on feedback, to decide whether that was an appropriate response or we need to change it. And we go through this process until we decide, yeah, okay, we accomplished what I want to accomplish. I store that information and it's there for me to retrieve the next time. That's called learning. Okay, I'm also going to be talking about then how research has shown that the autistic brain has imbalances and inconsistencies in the way it takes in information, processes it, their ability to respond to it, and which leads to, again, feedback problems that enable them to learn from it and be able to store it and then retrieve it. I am going to be showing you the difference between this is how an individual responds because of the differences in the brain. This is how an individual, or behaviors, this is what it looks like when they're trying to cope because of those challenges. And these are the behaviors you're going to recognize that are self-regulatory. When we feel stressed, what do we do to help recontrol and stay calm? I'm also going to be pointing out frequently the strengths. How are some of these potential strengths that we can build on to become stronger? I'm going to be very clearly identifying how can you accommodate these behaviors, what assistive devices can enable them to make that response faster and easier, and how you can change you in the way you prompt them to teach them that will accommodate and get better responses from the individual. I will also in the training be derelict if I did not talk about what triggers some of these challenging behaviors that we all see, as well as what you should or shouldn't do, because you may be a big part of the source of what triggers these behaviors that you need to understand. And finally, I'm definitely going to be talking about the importance of intrinsic motivation on achieving the goals that you set using the neuro-strength-based approach. So I'm going to give you a short example taken from the training module to show you how I've put this together to explain. And I'm starting with getting their attention. And we're talking about getting the attention of someone who's oversensitive to sensory input. You know what it's like getting the attention of someone who's fussing about, oh, everyone is moving and the lights are too bright. They're so distracted by the environment that they are in that they're not going to attend. The child that blocks out sounds because it's too loud, or I hear a sound that no one else can hear. And so they're not going to pay attention. The individual who's so distracted by the soap that you used or the perfume you think you're wearing. The individual, you're working on oral motor skills and feeding skills, and they want nothing to do with it. So how do you approach them? You can't get them to attend to it, much less relate to it. and those that don't want to be touched. And you give them a pat on the back to say, good job, and they freak out. You have to recognize these are all behaviors, response behaviors, how they respond to sensory input through the body senses or environmental senses. So let's look at some coping behaviors. When you are hypersensitive, how do you cope with it? First thing, avoid. And I'm definitely a hypersensitive. And that is, my goal was to do what you tell me to do and get out. So you go away and leave me alone so I could get out of the situation. If you can't avoid it, you can escape. Do anything you can to get out of the situation. Or even, which is my strength, hyperfocusing in order to block out input. If I am focused on what is most interesting to me, I can then shut down everything else. Now you've got my total attention, but don't bother to distract me, because then you'll set me into a meltdown, because now you're bringing in external input that I'm trying to block out. Okay, stimming is an attempt to self-calm. It is a self-regulatory behavior. And it is a response that I have seen in myself and I've seen in my clients that is basically to heightened input. Whether it's excitatory, I will stim if someone makes me excited about something. I'm going to stim to calm myself down. It is a response to heightened activity. Input or a heightened emotion. Input to the muscles and joints is always calming to the nervous system. It has a purpose. You may not see it. And in my training module, I do point out how typical people stim for the very same reasons. So how are these potential strengths that you could build on? If you teach them to advocate for breaks, you're going to eliminate their need to escape or avoid. Teach them to advocate for breaks. Use their strong interest to help them block out extraneous input. Get them into a setting where they can incorporate a strength into the activity. Now they're going to be really engrossed, and that will enable them to block it out. Teach them or provide alternative ways of self-calming that are meaningful to them. If you find their particular way of stimming to be annoying to you, then build on it. That's the purpose. Teach them how that ways that are more socially acceptable, but serve the same purpose. Now you are building intrinsic motivation, because you're helping them to understand themselves and how to accommodate themselves and advocate for themselves, which are very powerful tools. All right, now we're going to talk about accommodate. How do you accommodate these behaviors? My mantra has always been feed the need. The need that you're seeing, feed it. Make changes to the environment, task, and maybe what you do that will meet their needs for calming input. So provide input to them that's calming. Sitting in a beanbag chair provides a deep pressure. It's kind of like a hug. It just feels good. A weighted vest will do the same thing. Look at the environment itself. How overstimulating is it to the individual? Can you rearrange and calm down the environment itself to better meet their needs and help them to attend? And then look at yourself as a sensory provider. Are you hands everywhere, moving, showing, directing? Are you constantly talking to them, bombarding them with words? Look at yourself and how can you calm yourself? And this has been a very effective tool that I have found in a school with the educators that I've worked with in terms of getting the response that they want, is to look at themselves as a sensory provider. Now, again, you are increasing their intrinsic motivation because they can see tools that enable them to self-calm. How and what's important about the environment that enables them to better function, and what they can advocate for to say, oh, you're talking too loud. No, you're doing that too fast. To advocate for themselves, which makes them intrinsic motivators to want to learn and understand what they need to be able to learn. So what strategies or assistive devices could you use to help oversensitive individuals? Well, for one thing, for those that are visually sensitive, allowing a hat to be worn indoors or sunglasses to be worn indoors that limit their distractibility visually. Providing headphones or earplugs, they don't block out all sound. Try it. But they do block out the annoying, distracting little sounds that most of us filter out, but allow the dominant sounds to still be heard. Make it a no fragrance zone for those that are sensitive to smells. Lollipops are a great tool for helping the individual with oral sensitivities because the sucking puts deep pressure, which is calming to the sensory system, but it also lets them explore then the tongue, the cheeks, the teeth, while having a lollipop in their mouth, which is what you're trying to get from them anyway, is better oral awareness. Make sure you always have a hooded jacket on hand for those that are sensitive to touch. That will protect them from accidental touch in the course of a therapy session. Now, that was an example of what kinds of training that those that engage in the learning about the neural strength-based approach will get. What I want to talk about now are the problems that anyone can anticipate about making the paradigm shift. Stacy and I discovered a lot of these frustrations, as did her therapist that participated. First of all, change for anyone is hard. 2, learning something new takes time and mental focus. We all have busy lives. We've got a lot of other things to do. You really have to be committed to wanting to make a change because it's important enough to you. You have to have the intrinsic motivation to want to change because it is hard work and it will take your time. It's hard to understand what you've never experienced. What comes easily and automatically to non-autistics, which is social interactions and language, you just pick it up like that, is what's hard for the autistic individual. We struggle with it. We have to overthink our way through doing things that you do easily and automatically. That is hard to understand. Letting go of your automatic judgments that you make about behaviors requires conscious effort. You have to bring to the thinking level, oh, I'm judging that. Maybe I should be better understanding it. That isn't easy. And when you can't see a disability, you can't see our brain to see how it is not working the same as yours, how do you know how to accommodate it? And that makes making the paradigm shift difficult as well, because you're used to looking at behaviors in one aspect, and now you have to shift to looking at it from another aspect. All right, what supports are we currently giving to those that are in the training program? We provide them with the video presentations along with written attachments that they can review as often as they need to or want to. We provide them with structured forms to help them gather and organize the information to develop meaningful goals, functional goals. We provide mentoring and consultations as needed. With my master's in assistive technology, I will develop custom-made assistive tools. Predominantly Stacy in this case, providing the support and helping them to monitor and report on progress as seen. Now, I'm going to turn the stage over to Stacy to talk about how it has worked out over the last couple of years of experimenting with this approach and from the perspective of the therapists who have actually tried it. Stacy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sue. So as Sue said, she came to me a couple of years ago with this idea, and immediately it felt right. I knew immediately that we needed to try this. And in trying this over the couple of years, I have really seen why we need this paradigm shift. And it's really a lot of the reasons that Sue talked about in terms of the autistic population that started young with the interventions that are originally provided are now adults saying, I don't like the way you treated me. Don't make me be somebody I don't want to be. I don't want to have to mask. And I completely respect that. And with this new approach, like I said, it felt right that this is a great new way to really listen to the autistic community. So from a therapist perspective, it's really changing the way that we think and the way that we have been trained in school. Really, the way we were trained is to look at developmental norms, look at how our clients, autistic clients, are delayed, whether it be language, whether it be social skills. It's just looking at those delays, not looking at anything else. Another old way of thinking is our clients would work for motivators. So if they did everything we asked them to do in a session, they'd get the iPad at the end. If they answered a question, they'd get an M&M. So it really was to get the motivator and not to learn the skill. Our old way of thinking was to think of what's appropriate or inappropriate, or what's a good choice or a bad choice. Very black and white. No other accommodations are looking at the needs of our clients. Another really, which obviously is still a current way of thinking, but I'm hoping will be an old way of thinking, is that when we reinforce our neurodiverse clients to perform neurotypically, that it should not be that way in the future, because we should be reinforcing their effort. We should be reinforcing that they're building on their strengths, not that they're acting neurotypical. So we're hoping that our thoughts evolve and the way that we provide therapy evolves, really a new way of thinking with NSBAA. So instead, we're going to look at sensory needs, different styles of learning, what's important to the individual. So yes, while we still know our developmental norms and know what happens next in development, it's really going to be more incorporating what's important to them, what's important to the family, what do they need, what accommodations do they need in order to meet those goals. We're going to look at what can our clients already do. If they're delayed in communication, well, let's look at how they communicate right now and how we can help build on that, as well as incorporating those intrinsic motivators so that they want to communicate. And maybe it's even providing those accommodations so that they have the desire to communicate. And most importantly, teaching the why. Why do we communicate? We're also hopefully in the future going to look more at how we can accommodate our clients instead of them masking. We really want to support autonomy. So everyone we work with can still be who they want to be, and they're not spoon-fed phrases to say or spoon-fed language that we are going to make them say to get a cookie if they don't even want a cookie. So really supporting the autonomy. Also increasing that self-advocacy. This is the piece that has really sunk in for me because, you know, if a client or a student that we work with is having blowouts, and really what it is we're just trying to decrease those blowouts, hopefully the forward future thinking is, no, let's teach this client how to self-advocate. The room is too loud. There's too many people. He keeps touching me and that makes me feel uncomfortable. So teaching that self-advocacy so they can stand up for what they need. So parents are going to be so key in this whole process, because really parents know their child best. So they can provide that important information of what they see at home in terms of what the child can do, what the child wants to do, as well as what the family wants to do at home or in the community. We've had clients give feedback that they just want to be able to go on vacation. They just want to be able to go to the grocery store. And so we're helping them see their child's strengths, as well as helping their child advocate so that they're comfortable going to the store. It is going to really require that mindset change for parents too. Just because as therapists, we're only with your kiddos for maybe an hour a week, maybe 2 hours a week. We cannot change your child within that time. But by supporting the NSBA approach and using these accommodations and looking at your child's strengths at home, you are going to see even faster progress. You know, changing that mindset of not the extrinsic rewards, it like giving a gummy because they sat for 5 minutes. It's going to be what is going to be that intrinsic motivator to want your child to sit and learn what we're trying to teach them. This will also really help build your relationship with your child. I often hear from parents, well, I don't really have anything in common with my child. But what we've seen through this approach and looking at strengths is that parents do. I had a parent who said, I love art. I love arts and crafts, but my kiddo hates them. But he was very much a sensory seeker. So we talked about, ooh, but you could use shaving cream to make art, or finger paint. And she said, oh yeah. So we figured out a way of using that child's strength as well as what motivated mom to build that relationship and connection. So yes, parents are important. And, you know, Sue and I have been working with therapists, and it really takes a whole team. So who is the training designed for the NSBA training? Really right now is occupational therapists, speech language pathologists, as well as assistants for both of those areas. And then the parents of the child as well. And then we really hope in the future to add educators that are working with autistic students in the classroom, whether it be in self-contained classrooms or in gen ed classrooms. ABA trained therapists working in the schools or home or clinic. Really anyone providing any type of therapy, psychologists, habilitation providers, respite providers, and then parents, obviously parents and extended family of the autistic individuals receiving services. So some of the information that we have been gathering from our families as we've been testing the waters with this approach to see if it's something to move forward with, which I can say it is we've been trying to get parent and individual input on what are they able to do. So if a client is not able to fill out the paperwork themselves, the parent fills it out, or sometimes both the client and the parent fill it out. What are they seeking to do? What do they already know how to do? Because those are their strengths. We also ask questions about what they need to learn or want to learn to do in their home or community. And those are those functions that maybe the family wants them to be able to do in the home, or maybe even the individual wants, or in the community. And then we look at those potential strengths. What does our client seek to do, but they still need a lot of support with, or they can't perform it effectively or efficiently? We see those as potential strengths. And then what's really important too are, what are the areas needed for accommodations? What stresses your child out? What makes them throw a tantrum? What just sends them into a tizzy? That obviously there's something with whatever that response is there for a reason. And we want to, those are those areas that we want to accommodate We aren't going to try to change them. So it's not desensitization, it's not fixing, it's how are we going to accommodate? How are we going to change their environment and so that it's comfortable for them? And then we look at and observe behaviors to see if they're intrinsically motivated or extrinsically motivated. So then for the therapists and educators, we're looking at the same thing. They're going to see different types of things that the client seeks to do or knows to do, different strengths, because in therapy, we see different things than at home. We're also going to ask the therapists and educators about potential strengths. What do they seek to do, but maybe they can't do on their own? And then also, what are some triggers that you see in therapy that may indicate stress or indicate that we need to make accommodations for? And then again, looking at how do you see your client as an intrinsic or extrinsic motivator? And then the important piece too that we look at are testing. What are the testing results? As a speech pathologist, if I see that a client has very poor receptive language, but better expressive language, then I'm going to note that as that may be a limitation. I may need to watch how many words I use when I'm giving directions or talking to the client, because that might be overstimulating for them. So making sure that we're using our testing materials to help guide this as well. And then looking at how we are as sensory providers as well. I am obviously, I'm loud, I'm very animated. And so sometimes when I have a client who is oversensitive, I have to check myself and step it back and be quiet when I'm providing therapy. And that's so important. And even as speech pathologists, if we aren't checking our sensory input, whether the client needs more or less, that's going to impact our therapy. So as we talked about, we learned about this from Sue about 2 years ago, and we started training our therapists about this concept. What is, not just strengths-based approach, but how does the autistic brain work so that we can better understand our clients? And so our therapists, as well as some of our parents, have been involved in completing the paperwork and working with Sue and I on how to change the goals so that they are neuro-strength-based approach goals. So they're including the strengths, they're including the accommodations, they're including the potential strengths. And this is some of the feedback that our therapists have provided. One of our therapists said, I feel like the client that I have implemented goals with seems happier during sessions, more smiles. Another one said, yes, increased engagement observed when using NSBA strategies, increased desire to engage, and overall mood throughout sessions. Another one said, after receiving goals and guidance on how to implement the goals, my client has participated more in activities initiated by the therapist. Parents have shared that the client is happy about going to therapy, and the use of the client's AC device to communicate has increased, and negative behavior has decreased during the therapy session. A great natural consequence. We're showing respect. We're building that trust. And so that negative behavior is starting to decrease. And then one therapist said, it's worked for one of her clients. I have more active participation, willingness to try new activities, and vocalizing his wants. This is one of the stories that a parent shared with my therapist who has implemented this approach. I've been working with my client on the power of communication, and that using his AAC device is not just for work, but to comment, to advocate, and to be used not just with me, but all the time. Since implementing the goals, he has started to spontaneously use his AAC device to tell his parents things without them having to prompt him. Like Sue said, this decreases that dependence. Dad told me they were on vacation. On the last day, they were all tired and ready to go home. My client used his AAC device to say, finish home, which led to validating his feelings and having a conversation about their vacation. So do you see the common impact that my therapists and the families have provided? it's building those social relationships. So while we're focusing on building those strengths, what is naturally occurring is building those social relationships, building that trust so that our clients are intrinsically motivated to learn what they're seeking to learn. So since we have discovered that we're on the right track with this approach, and Sue has done so much research in building this approach, we were talking to a professor at ASU, Professor Braden, and she has agreed to helping us with developing an official research study on this approach. She is an assistant professor in the College of Health Sciences and director of the Autism and Brain Aging Laboratory. So she studies aging, bioimaging, behavioral neuroscience, and autism. So some of the stages that we are going to follow in this approach and this study is that stage one, we're going to assess the participants involved in the training. So the therapists, the families. We're going to look at how they are able to identify the functional needs and desires of an autistic individual, their ability to interpret the communication of the autistic individual, including the behaviors, and identify appropriate accommodations to meet their needs being expressed, as well as the satisfaction with their interactions with the autistic individual pre and post training to see if that building of the relationship is occurring. So then our stage two in the research is going to look at the effect of the neuro strengths-based goals. So we're going to be looking at those goals we developed. Are they motivating the autistic individual to achieve those goals? Are the goals written in an effective way of the strengths and accommodations being provided by the therapist to avoid negative responses? And then the motivation of the parents to follow through with home programs provided to the therapist and the educator, which again, we will also be educating the families too, so that they know how to provide the home program in the most efficient way. And then our stage three of the research is going to look at the success of the neuro strength-based approach with the autistic individual. So what is their rate of progress? How many goals are they achieving? And the frequency of independent and interdependent behaviors. Are they becoming independent? Are they learning to ask for help so that they can receive the help that they need? So we hope that this has been as motivating for you as it has been for Sue and I over these past couple years in developing this approach. Of course, all the credit goes to Sue with her research. I feel very blessed and fortunate that she came to Bayo Enterprises to try out this approach, which it has already been very successful. So our goal is to start our official research in January. If you are interested in being part of that research, please reach out to us, and we will put you on the email list so that we will be able to reach out to you when the time gets closer and prepare you for that research. I will send out, you'll also have access to all of our slides from today, so you can look at some of these references that Sue has found, which is all based on our approach. And we hope you enjoyed this presentation today. And like I said, if you're interested or even just want to learn more information, definitely reach out to us. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you. We appreciate your attention.